Hi everybody, my name is David and this is All Things Sacred. So we went through a bunch of cards, let's hopefully go through a bunch more. This is the Major Arcana of Water. We talked about one other elemental Major Arcana. The Major Arcana, the Fool, of Air and Spirit, will also come to the Aeon near the end, also called Judgment in other decks. Major Arcana of Fire, and then the Major Arcana for Saturn, called the Universe in this deck, the World and other ones, which doubles as the Major Arcana for Earth, just like the Fool does for Spirit. But this is the Major Arcana of Water, here in the middle, and the card that came previously before it was the Lust card, the idea of sustaining a new and refined personality, a new and refined ego that starts to strive towards greater things. This card still can show in a material way, not this one necessarily, but this one more so, in that when someone hasn't, this can still just be lower based ego. All these cards can be seen in a much more material way, especially if there's a lot of minor arcana. Then it's saying that their focus, even though they're showing these greater patterns in their life of the Major Arcana, because that's what the Major Arcana are all about when they show up in a reading, are the greater patterns that go in our life. The minor arcana talk about the material reality of the day-to-day, and if there's a lot of minor arcana surrounding just a single major arcana, then it really gives a material base, a material focus to this pattern, not necessarily saying that these higher ideals of the hermit representing meditation, it doesn't necessarily always mean meditation for the individual. What it might mean more so is that it's just like, oh, they're learning how to enjoy aloneness, which is a good thing. All these things, they work in degrees as we go upon this path towards finding these truer representations, these brighter, these more solid representations of what these cards really represent, as the fullness of their experience, instead of just gracing the surface and kind of getting an idea of what this power might feel like, but still then being thrown off by the world and stuff. These two cards, they really complement one another. As I was saying, this refined ego, that idea of refinement, really gives into the lessons that one puts themselves through when they enter the Hanged Man. Because the Hanged Man is often an idea of forced sacrifice, of giving up things willingly. And the only reason why someone would give up things willingly, do this sort of renunciation, is because they found something that's worth striving for, that's, worth also giving up things that go against that goal for. And that's why they work together. This is the works of this ego, truly. And in its extreme cases, the Hanged Man is really like a monk. This is someone who is pure renunciation, who doesn't take in any of the pleasures of the world and only focuses on finding that wisdom of sacrifice. You could obviously see here's Odin hanged by the way that he's hung. Also Christ obviously was hung, as sacrifice for greater good, for the sharing of greater wisdom. And that's what this card is about. When we start to realize that we need to change, and we've done some of that changes, accept some of the changes, but we realize after we have to go through the forced changes that this change was kind of good for us, we have to, to really train that dog of Cerberus that we found in the Hermit card, requires our emotional involvement as well, because the meditative involvement of the Hermit is good, and the fiery passion and drive is good as well, but we also need to really, dig deep into ourselves, go into the recesses of our shadow, our human shadow, the things that, make us uncomfortable, the darkness within our mind and stuff. We have to seek more and more a deeper and deeper place within ourselves, because that's where the fuel for the light, this other dark symbol from the Hermit, or this other dark card with his, bright light, that's where the fuel is found, is by taking that darkness and transmuting it into that light. But there comes a point in our path where if we're really to find any, fullness, any self-realization, any self reflection even, if we're ever to, really become who we're supposed to be, we have to start giving up things that, we're attached to, that aren't, who we really are, that they're just, ego attachments. And that's, the value of this card. There is a lot of extremism that can come with this card. If this card does show up, a person who thinks that, they have to like renounce the world to become an enlightened being or whatever, if someone is following the path in this way, then they can go really gung-ho on all these ideas and actually kind of like become attached to the ideas too. This is in its purest form, non-attachment is how the Hanged Man really shows up. If he's to be seen in its purest watery form, he's the pure idea of non-attachment, of looking at things, equally, going through this sacrifice with the depth of the love of the fullness of water, of the depth of the ocean. That's why these ideas of darkness come into the card, is because it's the major arcana of water, and when you have so much water, it is a very dark thing. It doesn't produce its own light, and even the light that shines upon it from the surface, doesn't reach the depths, doesn't go all the way down there. And so we have to go down there, and we have to deal, this is also the card of emotional trauma healing, by going into these depths and stuff, by facing these darknesses within ourselves, these depressive states, these negative states, is the only way that we can really gain any wisdom, any insight about them. If we choose to turn away from them because of the other negative state of fear, when they show up, then we won't ever be able to find the wisdom that is hiding there in the depths of our own being, of our own experiences, and maybe our own, misunderstandings of the world, that, things that are so fearful for us. When we realize that in the depth of going into our trauma, when we can face that head on, and we can stand here still in the moment, recognizing that we're facing this thing from the past, we heal ourselves, and we become non-attached to these experiences. They no longer have a ruling effect upon our lives, and we start to take back, our true self. That's where these cards complement one another, because by doing that, we're able to take back that power. We transmute this darkness of this card into this light of that's found in the Lust card. Then that adds another ideal, a very watery ideal to what it is that we're putting into this chalice of light, because there's a number of things that we put into that chalice, but they are all good things. They are all the bright things of our life. And even if a person is very materialistic, the real power of this card is that there is still always something someone is doing in their life that is the divine speaking to them in some way, because we're all part of this one divine experience. And the divine doesn't speak to anyone any more or less necessarily than anyone. It's just that some people are able to more easily hear and recognize the divine speaking to them, and what it is, interpret, discern what it is that is being told to them clearly. And that's because of taking, a lot of these lessons that are given to us in the Major Arcana seriously, and using and applying them to our lives, so that we can start to, quiet ourselves and hear what it is that is being told to us by divine intelligence, and becoming clear, becoming liberated. Clear is like, we're like a glass that we can't see through. And that's the idea of this, renunciation that has to be found. And it's a precarious thing in this day and age, probably any day and age really, because, people go really hard on it, because when you live in such a materialistic time, when you live in such a materialistic world, then your response to it can be very extreme. You're like, I've been so bad. When you start to view the world in a new perspective, you might think to yourself, I've been so wicked and bad, and I've lived my life so wrongly, so now I need to change everything, give everything up, and it doesn't necessarily make for a happy, balanced, or fulfilled individual. Not necessarily doing this, experiencing this for its true, not seeing the height of what this experience, or the depth of rather what this experience can be. The depth of what this experience to be, what you find at the bottom is that, I can't swim. You made a big sacrifice. You made a big sacrifice, and you ended up sacrificing yourself. Even this refined ego, even this new ego that, is focused on finding better things and stuff, you ended up even sacrificing that. And the death card appears, and your sense of ego, your sense of self, suddenly disintegrates, and you can exist. You're that robot that's buzzed out, and now you could start to exist in the soul and really go through massive changes. You've been through small ups and downs up till this point, but when the death card comes, it's the massive changes that really start to get to you and make you question who it is you are, what it is that, that we need to be asking ourselves if we're to ever find any truth really about our lives, is who it is that I am. And when we go through massive changes where our personality changes, so a major renouncing example would be like, you renounce drug addiction or alcoholism or something like that, and then you come to the death card as the realization. It's like, oh look, I'm still me, I guess, but I'm not caring about the things I used to care about, or doing the things I used to do. How is this still me? That death of the ego really starts to occur. We get glimpses of it over and over. Of course, if this is the story, the tarot story, as we go through the major arcana, as we pass through it early on, this isn't the full ego death that can be represented on its highest scales. Say we pass through this path a number of times and we're near the end, then this is the true ego death, where we're to exist as a more true self, as a happier and more fulfilled and waking an awake individual, a liberated individual, free of the concerns that used to plague them before. But the death card, the major arcana of Scorpio, is really the idea of going through that rebirth experience as well. You could see the bubbles in the card as he plays his instrument upwards, that as he's creating this death, he's also the force, the cause of reincarnation. I will say that I have seen this card show up as a symbol of actual physical death, but that more so than anything is not the case when this card shows up. It's the idea of changing one's outlook, one's perspective on the world, oftentimes because of experiences that they go through, that they've had a part in. As they renounce things, as they change their life, they realize that their outlook on the world changed too. And this makes for a opening into a person, seeking for something else. It's now that things have changed, at this point, because of your own impetus of sacrificing things, you are given power at this card to direct that change after it occurs. You might not always have the power to initiate the change, but when the change comes, you now have the strength to move forward and make it something better than what it was before. And saying that, this card can be seen as an opportunity. That when this card shows up, there might be great upheaval in your life. A lot of dark things that you were looking at down in the depths of yourself start to come to the surface, or you mostly probably because you decide to start to take action so that they change and the reflections of your trauma are no longer held in your life, through your current relationships possibly. And the death card, you had a part in this too, usually. You even if not, it's still something that you have the power to change, because it also comes from within the depths of you. Death is, just talking about the concept of death, I do want to say that death is like not something that one should really fear. We should, there's an ancient saying from all over the world that if you die before you die, you won't have to die when you die. You won't die when you die if you die before you die. That's a lot of death. And the reason for that is because when you experience a true ego death, when you really release the bonds of attachment to this idea that I am my body or my mind or my emotions, my actions, my being, my consciousness, when you really experience something outside of that, you enter the state that's beyond death. And when you die, the same thing occurs to you. Suddenly it's like your consciousness is outside of your body, but you can recognize that. And you already have, if you're on this path, of finding death before you die, then you will already recognize your unity with the universe. You will already be in a state that's familiar to you because you will have existed in this state during and before before your death, during life. And so one should strive after taking the pieces that we found before in these previous cards so that this comes to them. That is, meditation, adjusting to the way that things are in the world, and allowing that to bring you inward, accepting the changes that are given to us, and striving for new ideals, striving to be better people, better, happier, people who help others to be happier, that we should strive for that, and that we should renounce things that are averse to that. Without being, without being scared of them, but just releasing them, really being non-attached to them. Because if you release something and you're like, it's evil, you have an aversion to it, and it still takes up part of your consciousness. By just becoming non-attached with those ideals of the Hanged Man, we should try to take these things as a cocktail so that we can allow death to open up into our lives, add in some elemental equilibrium so that this is a easy task. Balance our well-being, as we found in the adjustment card, or who we are. Really taking that idea, prepare yourself with meditation so that when you start to do this emotional trauma, this searching of your own depth, you are aware that this is going to come, and you are excited to initiate this so that you can maybe, in the interim of the change and conflict, tap into a true you that is sitting there wanting to take this even further. And that's intense. That's an intense card. That's Scorpio. And so we find that by releasing this, we can take it a step further. We take it to a step of real balance that comes from within. When we can allow this death to occur, when we don't fight the death card, then the art card, the temperance card, is what blossoms from it. Temperance is a really good name. Art is also wonderful, but temperance, the traditional name in the Rider-Waite form of the card, really speaks to this virtue of temperance that one starts to reach for when they enter the Sagittarian realm, when they come across the Sagittarian time of their life, over and over again. And that's when we start to kind of get it, We've taken all these pieces, and even the death card itself now becomes a part of the cocktail as well. It's the last piece so that we can start to create this shining and beautiful, unified version of the self. The lessons that started to be found all the way back in Gemini, which is the sign that's right across from Sagittarius, only now truly start to get fulfilled in their individual's understanding of them. Because here, there's those two beings. You can see this one being with its, I believe, 5 breasts. And but 2 faces, it's these two beings now become one. It's a singular. It's opened the door to allow yourself through your emotional trauma, by going through that, and still, having relationships, still experiencing the Lover's card and all the other cards, before and after this. Still having that in our lives. By going through that death, now you see, when you break through that trauma in yourself and you see another individual outside of you experiencing pain and suffering or negativity, or trying to give negativity to you or cause you pain or suffering, you see that same trauma that you dealt with inside of you expressing itself through them, although it be, however it may be, even though it might look different. You realize deep down that they're just dealing with this internal struggle that we all have to do so that we can learn to be strong and happy and to express goodness towards people. Even if that means, expressing our fiery nature, or our watery nature in scary situations. Sometimes, opening up emotionally is a difficult and brave thing to do. And, being, allowing yourself to involve yourself in a conversation so that you can be that intellectual self that is in there. A lot of people hold themselves back. I've seen that in the real world. This is the card of really bringing all of our being together and starting to see that in others. This is the card of kind of like purifying vision, a vision that's being purified, that's starting to see the true unity, not just as an ideological thing, not just as a thought form, as a thought rather, but as a true form, as an experience. All day long, you start to recognize that there is a way to be happier. And you start to actually do all these things that you've been trying before, and especially the lust and the adjustment, the hermit, all these things, they start to become easier at this point, because like the Sagittarian card, he's pointed upwards with his bow. And you're focused steadily on the divine as you bring, an idea of this card too is opening up this central channel within yourself in meditation. This is a yogic idea that, we exist on these two extremes of our life until we can bring our consciousness into the Sushumna, out of the Ida and Pingala, into the central channel. And where the chakras are sit within that central channel, so that we could start experiencing greater movements of consciousness, greater modes of consciousness, greater experiences of our being, of our bliss, of our consciousness. Those are of God. That is the divine. And the character here, when this shows up in a reading, is really saying for you as an individual that you are gaining good teachings, good lessons, that you are coming together, and with those around you, and with your own purpose in this world, which is to experience the fullness of life. And you are really starting to experience it. And it's it's kind of hard to when you're so deep in it, you just kind of have to keep focusing on those things that are good for you. And then you will move into a stronger character, a more powerful character who's ready to face the world. We've gone through up to this point a lot of soul searching, a lot of internal dialogue, a lot of personal time. But this is really finding the self that we want to be and starting to shine it into the world. And of course, on our first travels through the tarot story, this character won't be perfect, and we'll find that out coming up soon. But this is the time that an individual really starts to be ready to go out into the world now that they have made themselves healthy, done a lot of self-healing. And that's the real nature of self-healing. Is all these things that we talked about up to this point. This is how one becomes a self-healed individual, is by going into these dark places within ourselves and finding, proper modes and forms of meditation through which we can heal it without or with less medication, with less dependence, reliance on external things. We learn to discipline ourselves so that we live a life that's more conducive to happiness. And this is the character that is conducive, that followed those things up to this point. And now that we've started to know our own happiness, we can really stamp our being onto this world. We really, this is the time when we take that personality, that almost like egoless, that personality that, has gone through ego death, and we go out into the world and we make our imprint and stamp on the world. We show that we're here. This is the devil. This is the major arcana of Capricorn. And Capricorn is when we really, become that new self, or we start to become that new self. We take this new character. We kind of like learn this new self. We take this character that was found, or that was like born in the art card, in the temperance card. We take this new character and we turn it outwards and say, I'm going to go out into the world now. I'm ready. I'm prepared. And these are the baby steps, the devil, of going out into the world. And I am going to stop there. Yep. Okay, no, I'm not, actually. Because these are the baby steps of the devil. And I want to continue these baby steps because, this is really making that imprint on the world. It doesn't, the devil's real lessons, when you can go out into the world and you can express this card fully, is not a bad thing. This is another card, right? Like death and, the devil. These two cards especially are imprinted with our conditioning has imprinted on us the idea that they have negative connotations. But the devil, when you can learn to not judge that as a negative statement, as a negative term, as a negative character through the understanding of this card, then you can really start to express the true lessons that this card has to teach. In that, when you finally find your source, your well-being of happiness, through all these trials that you've been through, and you go out into the world, and you start to be yourself. You start to do what you want to do. You're taking your power back, and you are being your own true self. And people are like, hey, what the heck are you doing? You're a devil character in my book, You're suddenly, you're exposed to the world, and that's what the world is going to give you. This play of Maya, is meant to kind of try to keep us in Maya so that we don't go all the way to the heights of our true being. And so we're bound to face that, one way or another. Even if you don't face that in your personal life, we all, just being Americans, are a devil to any given number of individuals in any given number of countries, just for our nationality. And, it goes both ways. It goes all ways, The world is full of judgment, and we have to learn to deal with that. And so I can accept if you call me the devil. I'm here reading tarot cards. And to some people that's blasphemous or evil or wicked. Well, call me the devil, and it's not going to make my day any worse. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to continue to talk about the cards. And, that expression, that Capricorn nature that, I expressed in those words is really the power of the devil card. When you can, but there's also a flip side to it that's really beautiful. Because it's great to be strong in that way. It's a wonderful thing to be able to stand up for what you believe in and move forward on the truth when you know it's the truth, despite any of the conditioning that you have been put through in your life. But the flip side of it is really beautiful because, excuse me, not only do you not accept the judgment of others, not only are you so strong in your own truth that you're unwilling to accept any judgment of others, no matter what they say or think. We already learned, like in the cruelty card, people can say whatever they want. It's not going to affect me unless I let it affect me. I'm not going to be swayed by their judgments, but at the same time, I'm not going to judge anyone else. I have no capability anymore to judge another individual because I'm free of their judgments. When you become free of others' judgments, it's only because you've also done the internal work to free yourself of judging others. That you could look at others and there's discernment, but there's not that judging quality that makes you attached to them as an individual, being like this or that. You're free of seeing anyone stuck in their own permanent identity box because you don't recognize yourself as stuck in that identity box. So you're able to go out there kind of like this egoless being who's like, I'm being driven to do this. The divine intelligence is moving me forward, and I'm going to, build a beautiful structure is the idea at the beginning. And I say a beautiful structure because the next card is the Tower. And often, because it takes many times going through this path to really get to the most refined versions of the cards, often this character won't be building that great structure. They'll be building the horrendous tower that we'll talk about here soon. And when he is applying his energy towards that, then it really becomes a different idea of this card. So we see the phallic symbol in the background piercing the cosmos, spreading its web throughout of creation, of its own creation, out across everything. We see the testicles down here with male and female characters stuck inside who are bound and weighed down by the devil. And then this idea of the card is when we're early coming out with our new refined self, the judgments of the world are extreme and they cause us much negativity, much oppression. We feel much oppression. And this card is a very heavy card. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. And we end up building this tower that I'll talk about soon. Instead, the most perfect version of this card is that, the refined individual, the refined experience, or goes through or comes up to this card and sees its energy as like, oh, I need to take its power and I need to just, run with it. I need to go out there and apparently, I'm going to be facing a lot of judgments if this card shows up in a reading, but, I'm going to continue to be strong and not allow those judgments to affect me. I'm going to be free of them. But more so, a person's going to come up to this card and they're going to start taking in those judgments and they're going to respond with judgments of their own in their mind or even in their word or, however it might be. And it's going to go back and forth and a person's going to feel weighed down. And instead of building the perfect, the refined version, which would be the Tower of God, rather the temple of God, not even the tower, but, this big communal place for people to share their bliss consciousness being, their connection to the divine source. Instead, they build this tower of isolation. And that's because this card is burdensome. Instead of this card being so freeing, it becomes quite the opposite. It becomes very burdensome. And that moves us into the structure that we build. So this is our experience of our new found personality in the world, and whether or not this card is good or bad really will speak to the cards around it. It'll be pretty obvious, it's either, if this is a standalone card in a reading, then it's pretty obvious one way or the other if this is a heavy card or if this is a very liberating card. For the next two cards, the Tower and the Star, I am going to read descriptions that I wrote for the cards a little while back, maybe like a year and a half ago. I wrote descriptions for some other of the Major Arcana, but these two were my favorite. It's a little bit of a different style. I'm a lot more casual here, talking just freely about the cards. I had a little bit more of an artistic slant when I was writing the descriptions back then, but it'll give a little bit of a look into what might be released in a book in the near future. And it's not too far away from the descriptions that I'm giving now. I was still focused on the idea of using the cards as tools of self-realization, of self-understanding, of self-reflection, tools that help us to, fulfill all these things that I've been specifically talking about in the last cards especially. As we get here into the meat of the Major Arcana, we really find the purpose, why these cards are so valuable, because they really inspire a better way of living. They really inspire basic lessons that everyone needs to kind of hear so that they can start their path to really taking power back and making this world a brighter and better place. And, that's not necessarily only through material things at all. This is the value of these cards is that they go beyond the ideas that, I give money to charity or I feed the poor. Those are wonderful things and they should continue. But when one only has a mindset that the material is the way of going about it and they could continue to be unhappy and, spiteful people inside, then, they're not really spreading any peace. As they feed that food with one hand, they're putting poison in it with the other because of the mentality that they share with the world around them. So these cards are a great, guide in how to, find our own inner being and really create a happier person who genuinely shares happiness. Even if what they're sharing is abrasive, because that often is the case, they still end up sharing happiness because they only have that in their hearts and their minds and their actions. I'm going to do it in another video. I'll probably do it right now again. I just did that last video and this next one and probably do this next one too. I just, it's already half an hour in. So I don't know, I might start getting choppy, so I just want to start a new video before I start the descriptions because I don't want to stop in the middle of reading it. And the first one's a little bit lengthy, but the second one's pretty short, the Tower and the Star. And I'll say any extra words if I have anything to say. So thank you all. I will talk to you again right here soon.